Today we're going to be sewing the Polaris top by French Poetry. And to get started, read through your pattern, get your paper pieces together, cut out your pattern, and get your fabric washed and prepped. So for this pattern, there's only 4 pieces, and then at the end there'll be a little tie. But we are going to first start out by cutting the fabric, of course. So lay out your fabric and get your pattern pieces lined up. And then you'll be cutting out all of the pieces. So there will be 2 sleeves, a front, a back, and 2 gussets. And take your time cutting out these pieces. Make sure you go around the corners nicely, and then once all your pattern pieces are cut out, you're going to want to clip all of the little notches. These are what line up your pattern pieces when you're sewing, and transfer all of the little markings. So on this pattern there's some circles and some open squares and closed squares. And make sure you get the opposite sides too, since we're cutting these pieces of fabric together. Alright, let's get started. Step 1 says to take your sleeve piece, and where there's an angle at the top of the sleeve, you're going to clip right into it like I'm doing here. You'll do this on both sleeve pieces on the front and back side. Then for step 2, once that angle is clipped, you're going to pin the sleeve to the bodice, and you'll sew it from the top edge down to the full black circle that you transferred when you were cutting out your pieces. You're going to pin these together from top all the way down to that dot, and then you'll bring it over to your sewing machine. Once it's all pinned together, you're going to bring that over to your sewing machine, and you'll sew at a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, or a just over 1/2 inch seam allowance. So all of the seam allowances will be the same. So I just lined it up just past the 1/2 inch mark. And you'll sew right down to that black dot. The next step is to clip the fabric right in the seam allowance where that black dot is. Bring it over to your ironing board, and you're going to either serge that seam so that the raw edges are locked in, or just press it open, which is what I'm doing here. And repeat this step on the other sleeve to attach the sleeve to the bodice back. After this next step, the shirt is kind of going to start to form itself. So you're going to take the left sleeve, and you'll pin the side edges together with the right sides of the fabric together, and you'll sew from the bottom edge to the square that you transferred in your markings. And make sure to clip that seam allowance at the hollow square. And you'll repeat this for the other sleeve, but then you'll also repeat this for the sides of the shirt. So do the same thing. Pin the right sides of the fabric together, and then sew. This is definitely the hardest part of the pattern. It's the gussets, but just take your time. So start out by placing your fabric right side down on your work table, and then you'll take your gussets and also place those face down, right side down. And you are going to line up each of the corners. There's a little marking on each corner, and you are going to pin those up, and then you will pin the sides of the gusset into the sides of the sleeve, the sides of the shirt, the front and back shirt. So it's kind of confusing, but just take your time and just pay attention to what I'm doing here. It makes sense once you do it once, and I had to unpick it the first time. So now I'm taking it to my machine and I'm just going to go really slowly around each of these edges. I used so many pins here, so really just take your time. And I just go from corner to corner, and then I would back stitch, and then I'd restart at the next corner just to kind of orient myself. Basically just sew from point to point, from corner to corner, and just do your best to keep that seam allowance in mind, and it'll turn out great. Here you see me turning my fabric right side out just to check all the corners, make sure they're secure, and then I'm going to give that a good press before starting on the elastic casing. So you're going to turn and press your fabric about 1/4 of an inch. I think the pattern says 5 millimeters, but just give it a nice tiny little press and fold around the edge. And then you're going to give it a much bigger fold, and you'll fold it in about 1.5 inches. So again, wrong sides touching. This will be on the inside of your garment. Do this all the way around. You'll do this on the sleeves too, if you want to get a head start. And then you're going to sew right along that 1.5 inch fold line inside of the fabric. Do this all the way around your neckband and all the way around your sleeves. Here's a little something to keep in mind when you're sewing this first line of stitches. At the end, once you've almost met back up to where you started sewing this line, I always try to keep about 1 inch or 1.5 inches unsewn. This is where I stick my elastic through. And once you finish that first line, you're going to sew another seam all the way around about 1/2 inch up, and your elastic will be threaded through here. Once you've finished the neck, you're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the sleeves. Alright, go ahead and grab your elastic and grab a safety pin. And you are going to thread your elastic through that little pocket that you just made in the neck and on the sleeves. The pattern gives some instruction on how to measure how much elastic you'll need, so make sure you use that as a reference. And then you will just thread that safety pin all the way through the casing and around to that little opening that you made in the fabric. And you'll pull that through and you'll stretch it out so it is even all the way around. Overlap the ends by about 1 inch. And sew over those a couple times to secure them. And then you are going to sew that little opening in that seam shut. And again, you'll do the same thing with the sleeves. Thread the elastic through. You'll secure the ends, overlap them by 1 inch, sew over that a couple times, and then you'll sew that little opening shut. We are almost done with this shirt. So the next step is to finish the hem. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold it 1/2 inch, wrong sides together, along the bottom of the shirt, and then you will fold and press another 1/2 inch. As you see here, I am just ironing the bottom of the shirt 1/2 inch all the way around, and then I will do the same thing again. I will fold that fold I'm making right here again a 1/2 inch. So here's the beginning of that second fold, and this creates just a really nice bottom hem that looks very clean and very finished. Now bring your shirt over to your sewing machine and you will sew along that bottom hem at a 1/2 inch, and make sure you are pretty much right on the edge of that fold you made on the inside. You can even do this from the underside if you have the same color thread in your bobbin. So whatever is easier. This next step is optional, so if you do not want to bow, you are done. But if you do, cut out 2 strips of fabric that are about 1.5 inches by 15 inches, sew them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance or so, and then press that seam open. If you want to, you could sew this with the right sides together, which would make it inside out, and then you could turn it right side out using a little safety pin or a loop turner, but I don't have the patience for that. So what I do is I give it a good press in half all the way down, and then I take those 2 halves and I press those in all the way down, and I'll do this again on the other side. I'm going to fold the little raw edge in just a tiny bit, 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to fold those tiny little quarters of that whole strip, and then I'm going to fold it in half. So pretty much back to where you started, and give that a good press all the way down. But this way, all of those raw edges are enclosed, and it's a whole lot easier than having to turn it right side out. Next, you're going to edge stitch around the entire ribbon, all the way down the sides, all the way down the short sides, and then cut any loose hanging threads. Once your ribbon is finished, you're going to find the center point on your shirt and on the ribbon. It's pretty easy to find it on the ribbon though, because we sewed them in half. So you'll take that line and line it up with your center point that you find on your shirt, and you're just going to do a little forward and back stitching to secure that ribbon in place. You'll go right through the elastic and then tie it in a bow. That's the finished Polaris top by French Poetry. I'll have the link for this pattern in the description down below, and I will be back very soon with another pattern.